So I'm Arun Ramanathan, and I lead Pivot Learning. And for those of you that don't know Pivot, we're a technical systems provider to school districts, which means we provide a range of supports, usually in the area of teaching and learning at a systems level, looking at professional development systems. On the education finance side, we do a ton of work to help improve district budgeting practices and build strategic budget plans. And then we do a lot of work on other types of systems, multi-tiered systems of support, and leadership systems. So we're typically at the systems level in districts. Since 2011, we've worked with about 250 California districts. That's roughly a quarter of the state's districts. And last year alone, we worked with about 70 districts. And these districts are often the ones that don't get a lot of attention. They're the small to medium-sized ones. So we're in some very, very rural places in California, but we're also in some very urban places, but the types of urban places that you don't see a lot of attention from the press, and you definitely don't see a lot of attention from foundations. Previous to this work, I actually ran EdTrust West, so that was a bit of a different role, but before that I actually worked in a very large urban school district for the man to my left, San Diego Unified, for a period of time. So I bring that perspective too. So we were supposed to talk about the continuous improvement system. But before I start, I have a question for David Plank. Every year I run the Oakland Marathon, and I tell folks for a donation of $100 or more, I will agree with them in public for an hour, no matter how ridiculous the thing is that I'm agreeing with. So I want to know if this counts towards that, David.
I'll let you know.
Okay. He has banked 4 hours of agreement, as has this gentleman to my left. You think about this system, and there's a few things that come to mind, right? Like the improvement science stuff, I think is kind of common sense, which is great when you give common sense a fancy name, right? So what do you do? What are you trying to improve, and why are you trying to improve? Those are two very basic things. And I look at the old system because, quite frankly, when you think about something that Carl said and that piece that came out in Cal Matters, there are a lot of people right now who are dissatisfied with LCFF. They're dissatisfied with the LCAP. They're asking where all that money went. And they're also asking, what the hell is this system, this dashboard system that people are rolling out, and I don't know how to make heads or tails of it. So I'm going to argue a few things. And I'm going to argue first that the thing that we shouldn't do is perhaps what we've done over the last 7 years, which is every time we have a change in education, the pendulum swings all the way from one direction, right, to the absolute opposite direction. And so we went from an API with 2 indicators, which actually I will, doing my mea culpa right now. You appreciate this, don't you? I actually agree now that it was the wrong indicator. It was the wrong thing, right? And I think primarily it was the wrong thing because what it did was it drove poor practice at the district and the school level in relation to how you're impacting student performance in English language arts and math. It forced you to focus, because of the way it was structured, on a narrow band of students below the proficient threshold and push them up into that proficient threshold, basically ignoring the practice of supporting students on the bottom end of that and on the high end. And as a former special educator, thinking about it, I think it was a deeply corrosive system, and it's one that I'm glad the state has moved away from. Thank you. But the shift to the other side of that coin has also been one that I'm not sure is going to be beneficial for the long term. I agree with dashboards, but the current dashboard, to a great extent, is incomprehensible, right? I mean, it's wonderfully colored, and it has a lot of the right indicators on it. But the question with the dashboard is, what are you trying to do with it? And I'm suggesting that the state is trying to do 2 things that are actually very important things, but are served poorly by the current dashboard, the way it's constructed. And the first is a public understanding of how well your school is doing, right? Like, that's a basic thing. All of us, many of us in this room are parents, or we've got siblings, and we want to know how a school is doing. But we do want to know how a nuanced view of school is doing. But I'm not sure that the dashboard to the average person who is making a decision about a school is the best mechanism for that. I would suggest, even though this has been criticized, that maybe some of the lessons from the API of indexing multiple indicators is a better approach to expressing how a school is doing than the current dashboard structure. I imagine that there will be a push several years from now, maybe 18 months from now, to start thinking about it in that way because of criticisms of the current system. I also hearken back to something else I disagreed with, several years ago, when the Senate Pro Tem had a proposal for indicators pushed together in a dashboard type of way around social emotional, around academic, and I can't remember what the third was. I think it was like parent and community engagement. But it was perhaps a in-between approach to the current model that we've constructed, where there's too much for people to consume versus something that's easy to consume and is actually something people are consuming every day when they're going to their neighborhood restaurant or trying to figure out whether they should pick that Prius over that other car, right? Should pick a Prius. Okay, so that's one thing I'm going to say about the system. The second piece I'm going to say is that it's not necessarily beneficial from a continuous improvement lens, and it's a very practical reason for that. And part of this, I think, is actually the legislature's fault. There's too many indicators, right? There's too many state priority areas, and there's too many indicators. There's too many sub-indicators. There's too many ways to disaggregate it. And as a result, when you're trying to look at everything, you look at nothing. When you're trying to fix everything, you fix nothing, right? So part of the reason state policy, and if state policy is a sledgehammer in most cases, a hammer in the best of cases, is to focus people on what state policymakers think is the most important and relevant set of indicators at the local level, whether it's the intermediary level at the county or the local level at the district level. And I would suggest that the dashboard, in the current way it's constructed, is also post-mortem data. It means, you're looking basically at a dead corpse, right, versus, a living child, right? And you're thinking about how to react to them more in real time than you're trying to react to data that's maybe a bit old. And that's, I think, again, another direction that the state should start thinking about, because policy, even though it's improved, and it's improved substantially from where it was before, still has significant room for improvement. So, and that, again, gets down to this system of improvement that we're thinking about. And I would argue that there's a limited amount of time at this point to figure out this system of improvement in response to that data. Right now, the data, again, I think is unmanageable at the district and school level in relation to the action that you're going to take first, second, and third on the other side, right? And again, it's post-mortem data, so your action is delayed or it's not relevant. But right now, the system of supports is attached to that perhaps slightly incoherent structure and is also incoherent. There is no organization right now between the way that we're thinking about how the CCEE functions, how county offices function, how the CDE functions, and how nonprofit providers of support, of which we are one, but there are many others, who have deep expertise in certain state priority areas, how we work together and what our roles are. That is not a conversation that can take that long. There is, again, a time limit to figuring that out, and there are a set of stakeholders that have to be talked to, and there has to be some collaboration in this process as we think that through. I do actually give the State Board a whole lot of credit for starting off that process and listening to others as they're thinking about how to construct that system. The existing system that we have, even as we're thinking about this new system, is very 20th century, 19th century, right? It's whether you're in a geographic location, you will provide that support in person. We've made one of the greatest investments in technology infrastructure in the history of our country in the last 5 years, and we still think about things in a very one-to-one face, person face right in front of you way. And so I think, again, We've got some thinking to do about what an actual system means, with expertise being often geographically located, spread across the state, but again in specific areas where it can be delivered more broadly. So again, I think about that more as an ecosystem approach, and it's one that, again, I don't think we have very much time to think about. One last point that I will make, and this will get to something that Carl was saying about the school-to-prison pipeline. The districts that we are working with now are increasingly going into financial distress. This may seem for folks that we are at the apogee of California's education finance system and that we have flowed a ton of dollars into school districts. But we have also at the same time given them a much higher burden in terms of their pension costs. Their other fixed costs are increasing quite rapidly. And many of the districts that we are working with right now are laying teachers off. They are cutting their budgets. And when you are laying people off and cutting your budgets, you triage towards the most important problem. And often the most important problem is not continuous improvement. So there has to be a fix on the finance side.